Hello, dear viewer. I hope you've already subscribed by clicking the bell so you don't miss new parts or new stories. Enjoy the story, and of course, have fun watching it. Dig Two Graves. Chapter 4.2. Bud looks at me for a moment before continuing. Now, that being said, we suspected the photographs were staged, and we can prove it by little pieces of evidence here and there. First, we know that someone else took these photographs. The only way one of two people in the photograph could have operated the camera is via remote and a tripod. My expert blew up some of the photographs concentrating on the objects on the nightstand. The first three pictures were taken from almost the same position and from the clock. We know they were all taken at 1:30 a.m. Of interest, your body position, Jake, is identical in all three photographs. Now in the fourth picture, it gets a tad bit more interesting. The time changed to 1:31 a.m., and this picture is the only one that shows any movement on your part. In the remaining four pictures, your body position is identical to the fourth one. Unless you count my wife, it's very suspicious that someone would hardly ever move while having sex. There's also one other interesting thing about the fourth picture. The expert I had look at the pictures figures the camera shifted a good foot to the left. How did you figure that out? Bill asks. It's the calendar and the clock on the nightstand, Bud answers. He pulls out two more pictures from a folder, looks at them for a moment, and then puts them on the table for Bill and me to see. Pointing to the first new picture, Bud continues, "This is a blow-up of the nightstand from the third picture. From the perspective of the camera, notice the calendar is in front and to the right of the clock. The very left edge of the calendar overlaps the right edge of the clock. Now look at the same view from the fourth picture." We take a few moments and see what Bud is pointing at right away. In the blow-up of the fourth picture, you can actually see a small gap between the calendar and the clock. "I see it," I say. "That gap could only have happened if the clock, calendar, or camera moved, and it's a safe bet the clock or calendar didn't move." "Right," Bud says. "Like I said, my expert was even able to guess that the camera moved about a foot left. I gave him your height, and he made some guesses as to the distance between your waist and the top of your head. Using that as a base, he figured the camera was about 9 feet away. Once he knew that, he could just use geometry and figure out how far the camera moved." "That's good stuff, Bud," Bill chimes in. "Now we've proven there was at least one other person in the room." "Oh, we're just scratching the surface, Bill. I had a very good trip down in Houston." Bud laughs. "So what else?" I ask anxiously. Bud laughs again. "Keep your pants on, boy. You got a hot date tonight, or—" Bud suddenly stops in mid-sentence. "I'm sorry, Jake. That sort of slipped out before I even thought about what I was saying." I shake my head and motion I was fine, and that he should continue. A bit red in the cheek, Bud says, "I spent almost all my time down in Houston just in the hotel you stayed in, Jake. I asked around and found out the name of the bellboy who had been there the longest. If you want to know what's going on in a hotel, talk to the bellboys or the cleaning staff. I found one young guy that had been there for several years, and all it took was a picture of Grant to make him sing his fool head off." First thing I showed him was one of those photographs and asked him about the calendar. He said they didn't use anything like that in the rooms. The only way a calendar like that could have been put there was if the customer brought it. Then this bellboy starts turning detective on me, going all over the photograph. He chirps up that the water bottle wasn't provided by the hotel. I asked him how he knew that. He said the hotel had an exclusive contract with Ice Mountain brand and that the water was Aquafina. So Jake, that's a question for you. Did you bring any water into the room? "No, I don't think so," I puzzle, trying to remember back. "I certainly didn't go out of the hotel and buy any water and bring it back. You know I have a low tolerance for alcohol and often just drink water. While I was there, I just drank what was downstairs in the lobby or in the minibar in my room." "You told me Monday that you and a couple of other guys were celebrating Saturday night. What did you drink then?" "I had an iced tea with dinner. Afterwards, I had one beer and then water after that. Wait, I just remember something. We each bought a couple of rounds. Of course I was a cheap date because I was only drinking water by that time. I remember Schmidt buying the last round. He said he had to use the restroom, so he brought the drinks back himself. I didn't even need any more water, but he brought me a bottle anyway. And I did drink it. In fact, I now remember taking that bottle about half full back to my room. I suddenly started getting very tired, and so hung it up and retired to my room. I really can't remember much more than that until the next morning. I look up at Bud. "What are you smiling about?" I ask him. "Well, what you just told me jives with what else I found out." "You have more?" Bill asks. "Oh yeah, something big. I told you I made good buddies with that bellboy. Well, I got him to do something for me. This time it took a Franklin, but it was worth it." "Well, what was it?" I ask. One of the first things I noticed when I walked into the hotel was the security cameras. I asked the bellboy if they only had that in the lobby, or did they have them everywhere. He said they only had them on the front desk and the main hallways of each floor near the elevators. I asked if he could find out what room you were staying in, and if the tape for that floor was still available for the evening of January 15th. That's when I had to pony up the Franklin, but like I said, it was worth it. Bud reached into his bag and pulls out a VHS tape. My eyes get big as I watch him get up and walk over to the TV on the side of his room. Now I've already viewed this several times and even had some extra work done, so it's already queued up to about the right spot. Bud presses play on his recorder, and an image flickers on the screen. It's a view down a hallway. In the foreground on the far left are 2 elevator doors. On the far right is a convenience stand and one of those old floor cigarette butt ashtrays that's been converted into a trash can. In the distance is a long hallway with what seems to be an endless parade of hotel room doors in view. The upper right-hand corner displayed the date and time, and it was currently set to January 15th at 1:23 a.m. In the lower right-hand corner it said #18. Only a few seconds after the image appears, we see the far left elevator in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen open. We can't see into the elevator, but shortly 2 figures emerge and begin walking down the hallway away from us. Both are wearing overcoats, and the larger of the 2 is also wearing a hat. By his size and the way he walks, he appears to be male. The other is very recognizable by the mid-back level frizzy hairstyle she has. It's the woman in my photographs. We watch them walk down the hall. Bud narrates as we watch and said that he went and counted the number of doors between the elevator and my room at the hotel. He said they stopped directly in front of my room. As the 3 of us watch, we see the man in the overcoat produce a key card, open my door, and disappear into my room. "Holy shit," I exclaim. "That proves someone entered my room just before the pictures were taken." "You did it, Bud." "Not so fast," Bill says. "I agree this seems to be the icing on the cake, but the 2 doubting Thomasinas I heard this morning won't see it the same way." "What do you mean?" I ask. "It's pretty obvious it's the woman in the photographs. But the man in the photographs could have been you. He was about your height. They'll argue this is proof you did cheat. After all, no one but you should have had your key card." "Oh shit, you're right." "Not so fast, Kimosabi," laughs Bud. "I haven't shown you everything yet. First, this isn't the only tape I got. I managed to get all the tapes for Jake's floor for that evening. I clearly have Jake on tape entering his room a good hour and a half earlier, and he doesn't come out until the next morning. Second, I mentioned I called in a few favors. I called in a few down in Houston. As soon as I saw this footage, I rushed off to another video expert I know down there and had him take a crack at it. Initially, when my expert reviewed the footage several times and said it was doubtful we would get anything on the 2 individuals, as they seemed to be aware of the camera and had their faces turned as soon as they neared the camera's visual field. But then he started concentrating on that old chrome pedestal ashtray. He advanced the tape to the point where the elevator doors just start to open. Then he started blowing up and enhancing the section of the frame near the ashtray. This is what he got on his first blow-up. Bud reached down into his magic bag of tricks and pulled out another folder. This time, he pulled out a single photograph. It was a blow-up of the ashtray. Right on the corner for the chrome ashtray, we could see the elevator doors open and 2 people standing there. "Damn," I say. "We can almost make them out." "Hold your horses," Bud says. "This is a blow-up of the blow-up." Bud pulls out another photograph and lays it on his desk. Bill and I both look at it and then at each other. "Is that Schmidt?" Bill asks. I look at the blow-up again. Although grainy and somewhat distorted in the curvature of the chrome ashtray, we could clearly see the 2 elevator doors as 2 parentheses, And framed in the middle of those two curved elevator doors were two faces. One belongs to the woman in my photographs. The other belongs to the VP of sales at my firm, none other than Thomas K. Schmidt. I whistle. "I'm not done yet," Bud says with glee. "I had the bellboy access the security logs for your floor for that evening. It seems it shows your room being entered by someone in maintenance at 1:23 a.m. that morning. I tracked that guy down, and he wouldn't admit to anything except he lost his card sometime that night. He didn't find out about it until 4 a.m. or so. I'll bet you $1 to a donut he took a bribe. After all, that's how I was getting all of my information." Bud holds up his hand when I try to speak. "One more thing, Jake, and then I'm done. The bellboy even recognized the woman in your photographs. She's a high-class hooker. He gave her name, and I even tracked her down. She wouldn't answer a lot of questions, but did say she was hired as part of a practical joke. She simply acted like she was fucking you, but never did. She laughed and said they never even bothered to take your pants off. Of course, she refused to let me tape record her or sign a document." Bud smiled and threw an audio cassette tape on the desk. "But as luck would have it, my recorder was accidentally turned on, so I screwed up and taped it anyway. There's no way you could enter it as evidence for court, but it may carry a little weight with a certain prosecutor." Bud throws one last photo on the desk, and we look down at my partner in bed. "There she is, Jake. There's your mystery fuck." I sit back and laugh, much more in relief than for any other reason. A deep laugh, one that I've needed for days. I look at my watch and see that it's barely 10:30 p.m. I quickly give Vicky Gambino a call. She doesn't answer, but I leave a message indicating that Bill and I would like to meet up with her and Susie tomorrow. We have one last consideration for Susie, and if that doesn't convince her that I was innocent, then I wouldn't fight her suit for divorce. Both Bill and Bud are quiet while I make my call. Bill puts a hand on my shoulder. I grin, and the two of us begin talking strategy for the next day. Bud gets up and makes a fresh pot of coffee, and for the next hour we kick around several ideas. Just as we are about to break up for the evening, my cell phone rings, and it is Gambino. Bud's phone rings at the same time, so I get up and step outside. Vicky says she got my message and had talked with Susie. They would meet us at Susie's office at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. After hanging up, I walk back into the conference room and tell Bill, the game is on. Bill and I quietly talk a bit more strategy for the next day, while Bud finishes up his phone call with a few grunts. He finally hangs up and sits quietly, a bit too quietly. "Something wrong, Bud?" I ask. "Not sure yet," he answers gruffly. "I still got a few irons in the fire. I'll let you know when it's the right time." Bill and I just give each other a puzzled glance. Bud seems a bit sour for someone that just broke this little situation wide open. It almost seems like he's stonewalling a bit, but maybe it has to do with one of the other agency's cases. I can't think of too much that could go wrong with ours that might throw a damper on what was uncovered today. With Bud's disposition in the crapper, Bill and I silently come to the same agreement that it was time to break up our little group. With a few handshakes all around, Bill and I head outside, have a few last words, and then split up. I drive back to my hotel and break the seal on the mini bar. Taking a cold one outside onto the balcony, I take a moment for a very heavy sigh and begin to reflect back on the last few days. Life has been nothing but a roller coaster and a whirlwind since Friday. For maybe the first time, I start to give serious thought to what transpired Friday night. My mind has been in turmoil. I was in such a rage that evening, but I can also see how Schmidt set everything up. In hindsight, it's easy to see how Susie jumped to the conclusion she did, but couldn't she have talked to me about it instead of humiliating me and literally putting me into the hospital? Her reaction was swift and deadly, but she's always been that way. I knew that before we got married. I still have a lot of anger against her for not even giving me that chance to talk about it. And then there's the whole issue of fucking that asshole right in front of me. Even though I know how ruthless she can be, the level of deceit to lure me into that chair, and then the betrayal. Will we be able to work our way through this? I know in my heart I love her. That's not a question. Strangely, it's not even a question of trust. This was a one-off thing she did as revenge. She was reacting to her own rage, and that once she discovers the truth, she'll be mortified. I wander back inside the hotel room for a moment to grab a rare second beer before retreating back to the balcony. Settling heavily into the chair, I sigh, knowing that I want somehow to fix all of this, but not sure of how to pick up all the pieces. I stare out at the lights of Dallas as I nurse my beer. I feel like tying one on and getting drunk, but know I need all my wits about me for the meeting with Susie tomorrow. Halfway through my beer, my cell phone rings. I check it quickly to see that it's Bud. Bud is nothing but abrupt and tells me to expect a package on the front desk of my hotel, no later than 7 a.m. He says there will be a few things in the package marked for Benner's eyes only. He makes me promise to deliver it only to Benner, and not to look into any of the folders that were marked. I reluctantly give him the promise I wouldn't, but not after arguing with him for several minutes. He says little as is his nature while I argue with him. His only response is that there is a time and place for everything. Right now, it's not the right time. I grunt in response, and Bud forces me to promise not to look into the folders one last time. After hanging up with Bud, I think back to when he was in his office and try to remember anything I heard that would give me a clue as to why he seemed so gruff. I shake my head, realizing that Bud said very little even then. A bit of foreboding descends over me while I call Bill to tell him about the package. Bill is just as mystified as I am and suggests we meet at the same little coffee cafe no later than 7:45 so that he would have some chance to see what Bud was putting into the package. Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. to say I slept restlessly last night would be an incredible understatement. The only thing more difficult than last night's sleep was resisting a peek inside the package, waiting for me at the hotel's front desk. After seeing all of the contents marked with Bill's name, I was somehow able to resist examining the contents. The only reason I was able to hold off was because I gave my word, to an old friend such as Bud, no less. Bill has just joined me at the booth I grabbed in the corner. I first slide across the table the coffee I bought him, followed by Bud's package. He lifts the lid on the box and frowns a moment, extracts the two folders inside, and then stands up and moves away a few paces. He looks through both folders as I extract the voice recorder from the pocket of my jacket. It is also marked for Bill, but I sorta broke my promise to Bud. I did promise to not look into any folders. I didn't say a damn thing about not listening to any audio tape. I stare down at the recorder, trying desperately to keep the anger bottled up that threatens to boil over. Rage at Susie, if not pure malevolence at that asshole Schmidt. It is only the despair in my heart that helps me keep the rage contained. Bill returns to our table and asks if I'm ready to head up to Susie's office. I ask him to wait a minute and then explain the tape and what I heard on it. He puts a comforting hand on my shoulder, and then we discuss what we might do with the information. Our mood is decidedly different than it was last night. Grimly, we pick up our material and begin walking toward my wife's office. A look of expectation is on both of their faces as we enter. Silently, I watch as the look of expectation changes to puzzlement for both of them. I realize they expected us to come out blasting. Instead, we have entered as pallbearers, ready to bury the dead. Bill reaches into his portfolio and extracts the affidavit secured yesterday by Janine. He hands both Susie and Vicky a copy. "What is this?" Susie asks. "I suggest you read it," Bill says. "It speaks for itself." "Where's the original?" Susie asks. "We have it. We plan on turning it back over before we leave today," Bill says. Both of them quickly scan the document and look at each other. "Did you see Heidi before she signed this?" Susie asks me. "Yes, he did," Bill answers for me as I remain silent. I can feel my anger just burning below the surface. I don't trust myself to speak. "Then I agree with your counselor. This document does speak for itself," Susie says. "It says that Heidi, when confronted by Jake, will sign anything." "What?" I yell. Bill's hand immediately and firmly grips my forearm, squelching the next words that were about to come out of my mouth. "Of course she signed this, Jake. She's been your secretary for years. She's been your lover for who knows how long. You're intimidating, and basically you coerced her into signing this new affidavit. Have you completely lost track of all your senses?" I respond incredulously. "You're completely ignoring everything you know about both Heidi and me for the past 8 years. You cheated on me. I don't have a clue as to who you are," Susie replies. "After last Friday night, I could say the exactly same thing," I hiss, forgetting my promise to let Bill do the speaking. His reminder is to even more tightly squeeze my forearm. At least this time, Susie has to look away. Only for a moment though, and when she looks back into my eyes, the prosecutor's mask is in place. Bill pulls another document from his portfolio. "This is a copy of the original document you gave my client," Bill says, handing each of them a copy of the original affidavit. "We are curious if either of you noticed the decidedly different tone between the first and second pages of the affidavit you apparently believe to be the truthful one. Did you notice the first page is a harassment complaint? The second page accuses my client of poor leadership skills, as if it is a performance evaluation. These two pages don't fit together." "That's an opinion you and your client seem to share by yourselves," Vicky Gambino says. "Susie," I blurt out, again forgetting my promise. "Heidi told me she never saw that first page. She says the original first page was my performance appraisal. She says she signed the second page and was told to initial both pages. She says there was no notary there." "Of course she'll say that, Jake. You've coerced her into covering your ass. Has anyone noticed that this woman signed two completely different affidavits? Doesn't this speak of her character?" "You know damn well of Heidi's character," I challenge. "Now that's what I want to see. My husband sticking up for his lover against his wife." I look at her flabbergasted. "Pot calling the kettle black," I simply respond. But at the same time, I see Susie's resolve weakening a little. She knows I speak the truth about Heidi's character. She may have lost all faith in me, but she hasn't about Heidi. "How come Heidi hasn't said anything about this until now? She would have known about the affidavit last week," Susie challenges. "Heidi's brother has had a drug relapse and was jailed. Heidi's been down in Houston with her family trying to take care of the situation. Of interest, would either of you venture a guess as to who actually secured the signature on this document?" Bill asks, waving his hand at the copy of the initial affidavit. Neither one of them rise to Bill's bait. The HR executive director herself, Miss Hinckley, went all the way out to Heidi's house to get Heidi's signature, just hours before Heidi left to go to Houston. Hinckley offered to help Heidi with her brother's problem. She told Heidi not to worry about how much time she needed to spend in Houston, to spend all the time she needed. Hinckley even told her that my client personally sent her out to see Heidi with instructions not to worry about any family leave. Jake didn't send Miss Hinckley out on that trip. Why would an executive HR director go so far out of the way to help Jake's former secretary without even telling Jake? Why wouldn't she send one of the several HR representatives that work under her? And that's not to mention the fact Jake didn't even know about any problems with Heidi's brother until yesterday. And it's our understanding that Miss Hinckley is a close personal and professional ally of Mr. Schmidt, someone you have recently allied yourself with if I'm not mistaken. Susie glances at me at the reference of her and Schmidt. For a moment she pales, but then almost as quickly the hard prosecutor mask descends and she theatrically throws up her hands. "None of these arguments matter," she says. "The pictures themselves condemn you. Even if the woman in the pictures isn't Heidi, you've clearly been doing it with someone. I'm not divorcing Heidi, I'm divorcing you." Bill's hand again tightens on my forearm, cautioning me. Bill looks at Vicky and says, "It's our understanding from the meeting yesterday there were two and only 2 points of contention leading to the suit for divorce. While both are damning on their own, together they make an impelling case. We have already cast significant doubt about the first contention, the affidavit. We have even more information that will completely shred any remaining doubt about the initial affidavit and prove it to be forged. The second contention is the pictures about which we have raised significant doubts. Wouldn't it make sense for everyone to cool down, take a step back, and get the facts before proceeding? The original affidavit hasn't been proven false," says Vicky Gambino. "As far as anyone knows, Miss Bevis is in those photographs, and she's now trying to cover up for her boss. After accusing him, she's had second thoughts and doesn't want to bite the future hand that will feed her. Nothing has proven that the original document is not valid." Bill looks at me, and I subtly shake my head about revealing the information about the tattoo at this time. It doesn't appear that either of them is receptive. As just said, there is data that will shred any doubts about the original affidavit. We only need the time and opportunity to present it. "I sincerely doubt that, and I am tiring of all this grandstanding," chirps in Susie. "Jake, believe me, I took a firm look at the evidence. It made me sick to my stomach. I then had experts look at it and they confirmed it. This charade that you and your lawyer insist on presenting only makes you look all the more desperate and despicable." Desperate and despicable? To have arrived at the conclusions you have proves one thing, that you failed to look objectively and also failed to consider all the facts. It's obvious for one thing that you have completely ignored any issues of character. After you see what we have to show you this morning, I'm confident you'll be looking at it quite differently. What we will show you will completely obliterate the 2 pieces of evidence you are set to hang me with. I literally clench my teeth to prevent myself from adding any more comments about the previous Friday. And, well, as Bud said, it's not the right time or place. At least not right now. In the back of my mind, I have to wonder why I am even sitting here. Jake, this isn't a game. This isn't something you have to win at all cost, even to make stuff up. Suddenly, I know why I am still sitting here wanting to prove my innocence. Whatever we show you can be easily authenticated, or at least already has been. But you're wrong to some degree. You're right. It's not a game. But it is something I have to win. You accused me of something extremely egregious. Something I would never consider doing. You impugned my dignity and my character. And you punished me severely, both emotionally and physically, for something I never did. Even if you refuse to see the light, what we have done the past few days to completely disprove everything you have thrown at me is important to me. It is up to you to determine if it is important to you and eventually us. Thank you for those brilliant remarks, counselor, Susie retorts sarcastically. I smile back at her, mainly because I know it pisses her off when she's trying to get under my skin, and I just smile back. To head off a deteriorating conversation, Bill interjects, "Do either of you know about the invisible printer codes the U.S. Secret Service requires printer manufacturers to print on each sheet of paper?" Not surprisingly, Susie knows all about it. However, Vicky Gambino has never heard of it. I sit back and sip my coffee, while Susie, in her normal, concise and efficient ways, brings her lawyer up to speed. "So what about these invisible codes?" Vicky asks. "Are you aware that the 2 sheets that make up the supposedly original affidavit you gave me on Monday were printed at different times on the same day? Wouldn't that make sense?" Vicky asks. "The sheets would come out of the printer at slightly different times." "Yes, it would," Bill counter. "Except in this case, the second sheet was printed at 7:03 a.m. The first sheet was printed 15 hours later at 10:13 p.m. That sheet was printed after the affidavit was signed by Heidi and supposedly notarized. It was printed hours after Heidi got on a plane and was in Houston. If Heidi was in Houston, how did her initials get on that page?" I watch as Susie sits a bit straighter and skeptically narrows her eyes. "You can prove this?" "You can prove it yourself. Your staff has even more expertise than what we are able to provide. It's something that could have easily been done before," Bill counters with a dig. Bill reaches down into his portfolio and rifles through several folders until he finds the one he wants. "Here you are." He throws the folder on the table. "This is the same folder and same original so-called affidavit you gave me Monday. Have your experts go through it." She pulls the folder off the table and opens it, checking the contents. "I will," she says emotionlessly. "So assuming they were printed at different times, that doesn't necessarily prove anything malicious as you claim. Perhaps there was a typographical error and they just reprinted the first sheet?" "Miss Gambino," Bill quickly speaks up. "I'm sure you're aware that would never be done with a document that was supposedly notarized. But more importantly, if they did reprint the first sheet, how did you explain Heidi's initials on it? Remember, Heidi was in Houston by the time that sheet was printed. Not only that," I add, "Heidi's initials on the first sheet are not in ink, but in toner. The same toner used to print the first sheet. This fact confirms Heidi's recent affidavit that she had never seen or initialed that page." I think we have sufficiently proven that at least the first sheet of the affidavit you have presented is in fact a forgery. That not only was it not signed by Heidi Bevis, but in fact, she never even saw that page until it was presented to her this week by Jake, Bill adds. Without admitting anything, the look on both Susie's and Gambino's face told me all I needed to know. They know that affidavit was forged. "I do hope you realize," Bill adds, "the very fact the affidavit is a forgery also introduces malicious intent." "I hope you are not suggesting my client forged that affidavit or has done anything maliciously," Vicky quickly says. "I think it's clear that your client has done several things quite maliciously," I add hotly. Bill's squeezing hand again forces me to close my mouth. We are not insinuating that your client had anything to do with forging that affidavit. We even have evidence as to who did. It is a shame that your client didn't execute sufficient due diligence to discover this information for herself. It only took us, with much less resources, a few hours once we had the document in our possession. But then we suspected it was false to begin with, while your client did not. Bill holds up his hand to quench an objection from Gambino. We wish to move on and present other information to you. Again, reaching down into his portfolio, Bill produces another folder. Opening it, he distributes 2 copies of the badge log data for the day the initial affidavit was printed. We had already highlighted the pertinent information of when access was gained to the floor, as well as highlighted to who those badges belonged. Bill explains what the documents are, and specifically emphasizes that at the time the second sheet was printed at 7:03 a.m., the badge log indicates only 2 people on the floor. Bill pauses while he let both women determine for themselves that those 2 individuals were Hinckley and Schmidt. Unable to contain myself, I know who gave you that affidavit, Susie. And I also know that you are aware the 2 of us have been adversaries for years. You knew he has long had it in for me. You should have considered that from the start. He set me up, and you backed him. I glare at Susie, and for once she doesn't hold my gaze and looks away. Bill says, now for what was certainly the more damaging evidence, the photographs. Yesterday we discussed the very short time period the photographs were taken. We also discussed about how my client didn't move during that time period. So you're admitting it's you in that photograph? Susie asks me directly. Yes, unfortunately, I reply. So even if that isn't Heidi, you still cheated on me with a woman that looks like Heidi. Maybe you even fantasized it was Heidi? Susie challenges. Do you really think so little of me that you have to manufacture my failings? I reply hotly. I gather myself and press on. Yes, it is me in that photograph. And no, it isn't Heidi. If you look closely at this last picture, you'll see the top of a tattoo at the very base of her back. Heidi, as you might guess Susie, doesn't have any tattoos. I'm convinced it isn't Heidi, Jake. Heidi's not the problem. You're the problem, Jake, Susie says, with her anger returning. What I would like is a chance to present our findings without being challenged on each and every point, Bill says. Susie looks at Gambino and then back at me. No, she says simply. Fine, Bill says. It will only slow up our presentation. It will not change it. First, the reason Jake didn't move in the photographs is because he was drugged. Drugged? Susie says. How do you know that? And why wouldn't you have disclosed that on Monday? I'll come back to that later. Right now I'm going to press on. Second, these photographs were staged. We have already agreed to the points about the clock and calendar. No, we haven't agreed. You discussed and we discounted it. Susie challenges again. Nothing was agreed upon. First, do you really think my client is that stupid to allow photographs of him to be taken while cheating? Second, we've already proven that one of your 2 major issues was maliciously forged. We know quite a bit of effort was put forth to manufacture a fake affidavit. You don't think that casts any doubt on the issue of the photographs? That the people behind the affidavit wouldn't go as far as to stage the photographs? With great effort, I'll refrain from commenting on how stupid your client may be. And there can be several reasons why the clock and calendar are positioned as they are. What about the water bottle? Bill asks. The water bottle? What about it? You're not suggesting the hotel doesn't sell or provide water? This hotel has an exclusive contract with Mountain Ice. They don't provide any other kind. They don't sell them in the vending machines, not in the dining rooms, nor in room service. If you look closely, that water bottle is of the brand Aquafina. It doesn't belong. You could have brought that water bottle in yourself. True, and he did. And he was given that water bottle by Mr. Schmidt. How convenient. It's all Schmidt's fault, Susie challenges. He's the reason you cheated? No, this entire situation is not entirely his fault. It's also partially yours, I hiss. And I did not cheat. Bill only glares at me this time, and I settle back into my chair fuming. There's a witness. A Mr. Weston was with both Jake and Mr. Schmidt. We have not yet had time to interview Mr. Weston, but we are confident that when we do, he'll be able to confirm that Schmidt came back with the last round of drinks and a bottle of water for Jake. That was about 15 minutes before Jake began to feel drowsy. At that time, he said goodnight to both Weston and Schmidt and retired to his room, alone I might add. I smile as Susie begins to look down at her hands. She always does that when she's stressed or feels a situation slipping away. Have you seen one of those flip calendars at a hotel? Bill probes. Susie raises her eyes. I'm not the one that needs to be answering questions. I'll take your avoidance of the question that you have not seen that type of calendar at a hotel. Or have you? No, she says emphatically. Want to know who has one of those calendars on his desk? I add, improvising. I had no idea if Schmidt has one of those calendars or not, but I see an opportunity to bluff. Susie doesn't answer, her eyes glancing back downward toward her hands. We can prove there was a third person in the room. You have evidence someone else was in the room? Vicky asks. First, we know the camera was moved. The calendar and clock were turned so that they would establish a time and date for the person taking the pictures. This again goes to the question as to why you would think my client would allow a third party take pictures of him cheating? Or is it more likely he was being set up, as we have already proven with the affidavit? How do you know the camera wasn't on a tripod? It looks the same angle to me, Vicky asks, with Susie now being quiet and looking at her hands. Bill explains about the blow-up on the pictures and the angle of the clock and the calendar. He then reaches back into his portfolio and extracts the folder with the negatives. Tossing it on the desk near the other folders, he invites them to have their own experts examine it as closely as we did. I look back at Susie. She was now wringing her hands together, her vision fixed. I don't even know if she is still listening. Jake, you said you had evidence you were drugged? Susie suddenly says, drawing herself back into the conversation. Bill intercedes. Direct evidence? No. Lots of circumstantial evidence. Yes. We don't have a water bottle to test. We can't run a blood test on Jake at this late date. But how do you think these pictures were taken? Have you noticed there's no evidence that Jake has even managed penetration with the woman in the photographs? Oh, come on, Susie challenges unbelievingly and standing up. I blurt, look for yourself, Susie, except look with your eyes open this time. Look without being blinded by what you wanted to believe I was capable of doing. Would it make a difference to you to know that I woke up the next morning with my pants on? Susie glances up at me and then back to the pictures. Shaking her head, she sits down. Jake, everything you've been saying is all directed along the lines of you being set up. Why would he go to these extremes? Susie, you already know he went to the extreme of forging an affidavit. And you already know why. I've been telling you for several months now. He went to those extremes for several reasons, and they aren't even that far-fetched when you consider the goal. We were both striving for one partnership, a very lucrative partnership. One of us was going to make it. There is a person behind all of this, and you know it. You know it as well as you know me. The other reason is that the two of us simply don't like each other, but I think his attitude goes beyond and borders on jealousy and hate. Nothing would make him happier than to stick it to me as hard as he could, and then rub my nose in it. But he needed someone close to me to make it really hurt. I watch as all the color drains out of Susie's face. I can see she now realizes fully how much she had been duped. I wonder if she started to realize that even if she didn't stick the blade in my back, she had a hand in twisting it. Vicky asks if we have similar evidence of a setup concerning the photographs. Bill retrieves a VHS tape that Bud had created from different segments of the hotel's security system. After getting permission, he walks over to the side of her office and turns on the TV. Inserting the tape, he grabs the remote control and retreats back to our side of the table. This is the security monitor tape for the floor of Jake's hotel room on the night these pictures were taken. He presses the fast-forward button until the clock says 1:23 a.m. He backs the tape up a minute and decides to let the videotape do all the talking. A few seconds later, we see the elevator doors open and two people emerge and walk down the hall. They stop and use a key card to enter a room. He fast-forwards the tape again until it reads 1:35 a.m. A few moments later, the same two people emerge from the room and turn away from the camera, continuing down the hallway. They push open another door marked by the sign stairwell and disappear. He reverses the tape up and plays the whole sequence again, to be continued.